for your attendance and turn them in when we collect the offering. That's the easiest way. And that way you look like you're doing something, and we'll just go from there. I'd like to remind you how important these opening statements are. Would you repeat after me? I am chosen.
I am chosen.
I am blessed.
I am blessed.
And I am loved.
I am loved.
And now would you turn to someone close to you and say, you are chosen. You are blessed. And you are loved. Good job. A couple of announcements that would need to be made. This coming Thursday at 10 o'clock, we are going to be bagging the greens. That means we're putting all the Christmas decorations away. I had a very dear friend, and well, in fact, he's still a friend, whose last name was Green. And he always had trouble when the Advent season came around because they were going to hang him. And so putting him in a bag is a lot easier thing to do. But if you'd like to come and help to do that, we would appreciate it. Thursday at 10 o'clock. You may recall that last Sunday I took the presumption and created our youth group. And on Wednesday, when I saw Deborah and told her that, she says, well, with your pay, you are now the youth minister of the church. The only way I can think to do that is because most of them have already left, is that I'm going to be putting in for a large travel allowance, and I will go by and visit them wherever they may be gathered. If you're interested in becoming a member of the church, either as an associate member for our winter residents or a full-time member, we would like to invite you on Thursday, the 17th at 10 o'clock in the fellowship hall for an exploring class. If you are interested in doing that, would you please sign on your attendance card and just write down exploring or I want to join, please let me in, or whatever feels appropriate. Tickets for the next Family Life dinner on Saturday the 26th are available out in the outside, and we hope that you'll be willing to sign up and come to that. Persons that have been recently in the hospital are Faye Powers, Anna Marie Polk, and Carol Irwin. Now I'll turn it back over to Deborah.
I'm going to invite the chair of our church council, Bill Price, to come down. He has an important word about an opportunity that you have in this anniversary year for our church.
Good morning. Good morning. This morning, our trustees chair, Mike Hicklin, and myself will be discussing our church campus and our plans for 2019. Last month, you heard that we entered our 40th year of ministry. And over those 40 years, we've touched several generations of Sun City West residents. And one of the ways that the church council has decided to celebrate this momentous milestone is by raising significant funds so that our trustees can ensure that our campus will remain a safe, a beautiful, and a comfortable place to gather for worship, for fellowship, and for study for the next 40 years. You have already received a brochure like this one and other information about Imagine 40 More Years. And our hope is that by December 2nd, 2019, we will have raised $400,000 for our trustees to use for the most critical capital and maintenance needs at this moment. And in the coming week, you will receive a letter packet inviting you to join us in making a gift to our Imagine 40 More Years campaign. So please pray prayerfully in considering this opportunity to be part of the future. And our progress report I have here, as of December 31st, 2018, we've already received 16 pledges, and we have a total of $54,960 available. So I'm going to ask Mike Hicklin, again, Chair of Trustees, to come forward and share some information with you.
Thank you, Bill, and good morning. We have prepared a slide presentation showing air conditioning and parking lot concerns. Additional remarks will be made without pictures concerning the addition of fire alarm protection for the chapel and sanctuary repairs and replacement needs. 21 systems valued at $300,000 provide heating and cooling to the church. You are looking at the sanctuary unit, which is the largest. Its replacement cost is about $100,000. It takes 6 to 8 weeks to order one and to build, several days to transport from the factory, and at least another week to install. It's about the size of a semi-trailer. Pictures show typical wiring deterioration from age and heat. There are an additional 20 smaller HVAC units on the 1 acre of church rooftops. 5 have been replaced within the last few years. The remaining 15 are operating at or near the end of their service life and could fail at any time. We keep them clean and serviced to help them continue running for as long as possible. Parking lot. The north and south 1/3 of the parking lot are badly deteriorated and in need of repair and replacement, as you can see in the slides. They pose a substantial health and safety risk. We propose to correct this situation as soon as possible. The center section was replaced about 2 years ago. Chapel. We need to provide a fire alarm system for the chapel to adequately protect it. If a fire were to occur, there's currently no automatic monitoring system to alert the fire department. Early fire detection could reduce the possibility of major structure and content damage. The sanctuary needs repairs and replacements to its aging interior. It's been, 35 years now. That includes improvements for audio and view systems, lighting, paint, carpet, pew cushions, etc. The dollars requested would provide a start to answering those needs. Our hope is to lay the groundwork for sustaining our 8-acre church campus for generations to come. God has and is richly blessing us as we extend his welcoming, love, and teachings to the community. This place, our church, is a representation of God's presence in our midst. God is here in this place. May we be all a welcoming, caring reflection of his love. We will provide a walking tour of the ground level sanctuary air conditioner located just outside of the sacristy and bell choir rooms in the southeast corner of the building. Please gather in the narthex at the conclusion of the service for that tour. Considering the weather today, you can also see Sean or one of the trustees at any point in the future, and we'll be glad to take you out there when it's a little drier. Please drive around the parking lot as you have the opportunity to observe the condition there. Thank you for listening and for your consideration of these needs.
Thank you so very much, both of you, for presenting that so wonderfully. And now I invite you to stand and greet those persons around you. Wish them a Happy New Year and tell them how glad you are that they're here this morning. I'm going to invite you to head back towards your seats and prepare your hearts for worship.
In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born, King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there, ahead of them, went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Please remain standing as you're comfortable and join me in the opening prayer. Gracious God, we give thanks for your great gift of Christmas, Jesus our Christ, the light of the world. We who follow him are meant to carry his light to the darkest corners of the universe. We confess our reluctance to do that, our fear of standing for truth and life, our tendency to hold someone else will make your love visible and real. Forgive us, we pray. God, second chances, give us a new start. Enable us to live as bearers of light and hope, today and always, here and everywhere. We pray in Jesus' name and for his sake. Amen. Please be seated. Our scripture reading today is from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 60, verses 1 through 6. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look around. They all gather together. They come to you. Your sons shall come from far away, and your daughters shall be carried on their nurses' arms. Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and rejoice, because the abundance of the sea shall be brought to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. A multitude of camels shall cover you, the young camels of Midian and Ephah. And those from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and frankincense, and shall proclaim the praise of the Lord. The word of the God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Shall I
Would you pray with me? Now may the words of my mouth be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Well, Happy New Year. It's good to be together on this first Sunday of a brand new year. I've asked several of you, and the answer has been negative. Did you eat your black-eyed peas on New Year's Day? Somebody did, yeah. Only one. Oh, there's another one. My mama told me that you had to eat black-eyed peas on New Year's Day, and she often served them out of a can. If you've ever eaten canned black-eyed peas, back in that day, they tasted like dirt. But we had to eat them anyway. Now I've learned that you can get fresh ones, and they taste good. So every year I have mine, and we'll see. I mean, how's your luck been going? If it hasn't been going so good, you might want to pay attention for next year. Today we're finishing up Christmas. This is the last day you'll get to see this beautiful display of Christmas decorations. Hasn't it been wonderful to have them? I'm so grateful to our worship team for their work in providing this atmosphere for us. And we're ending the Christmas season, moving into a new season called Epiphany. It's a fancy word. It means basically revelation. This is a season of revelation. And what's being revealed in this season is the wideness of God's love, the depth of God's mercy, the goodness that God pours out into the world. And we see that in the visit of the wise men. I'm so thankful for the costumes and all of that. Ken arranged for all of that. Would you thank Ken for that? And thank our wise men. It was a frantic week getting all of that done. I thank the guys that came yesterday and will be here for the second service as well. Having that visual piece of the story, I think, helps us move away from automatic reading and automatic listening. Some of these stories in the Bible are so familiar that they lose their edge. That when we hear them, they just kind of flow across, they feel nice and warm, and we don't pay attention. So I'm grateful for an opportunity to pay attention to this one. We don't want to miss the point in this one. It shows the truly radical change that Jesus was bringing into the world. We got the first clue of that on Christmas Eve. We listened to all those wonderful stories of the birth of Jesus. And I think sometimes when we listen to those, because it's so warm and fuzzy and it feels so good, we miss some of the things that are in that story. One of the radical elements of the Christmas story is the guest list for the birth. The people who were invited to that birth, although this was a holy child, were not the people who normally would be invited to things like that. It wasn't the scribes, the Pharisees, there wasn't King Herod. It was the shepherds of all things. Now, who invites a shepherd? Basically nobody but God, because they spend their time outdoors. They rarely have a time to wash their bodies or their clothes, and there are consequences to that. And mostly people would not be caught dead having a shepherd. They're very poor, low, kind of lowest of the low. And yet, for the birth of Jesus, God sent them a glorious heavenly invitation and guided them to the side of the manger. They saw that baby first before anyone in the religious establishment had any idea of what was going on. They were invited by God. They were guided by God, welcomed at the manger by God. And by that we see that with this baby, there is a clear message that the down and out and the downtrodden and those who would be unwelcome in other places are welcome at the manger. They're welcomed by God's own self. And this story of the Magi carries a similar meaning. And by the way, I should say, you probably know that we don't necessarily know that there were three. We just know that there were three kinds of gifts. And because there were three gifts, we usually think of three people. But however many came, they came bearing three kinds of gifts. And that word that is sometimes translated wise men and sometimes magi, and then it changes into kings at some point along the tradition line. Also, the base word for that also means astrologer or magician or sorcerer. So these men were thought to be from Persia or Babylonia, and they were thought to be masters of the occult arts, things like astrology and the interpretation of dreams. Now, given their finery, were you not awed when you saw them coming? I mean, it just is breathtaking, isn't it? And we would not imagine that they might not have been as welcome at the manger as we think. I mean, why not? They're kings. But they were coming to the manger of a Jewish child. And so I think there's a good, strong possibility that people hearing this story in Jesus' time would have reacted somewhat differently. What in the world are those people doing coming into a Jewish family birth situation? They're Gentiles. They're unsanctified. They're unholy. They're unclean. They may be rich. They may be fancy, but they're not Jewish. Why are they there? So I think when this story was told initially, that maybe it wasn't just about awe. There was this thing that had to be overcome that was about kind of indignation or a sense of things being out of place. They might have been shocked. They might have even been revulsed. And because of that blinders that they wore, they missed the point of this story. They were guided by a star, and they were looking for one who had been born King of the Jews. And by that we see that in this story, the Magi are the only ones in the story who understand who Jesus is. Unfortunately, in looking for the King of the Jews, they rouse the suspicions of Herod. He immediately says, well, I'm King of the Jews. There's not supposed to be another one. And that stirs up in him a desire to check into the matter, and he asks him to come back by when they've seen the child so that tell him about it, and implying that he's going to go and worship. Nothing could be further from the truth. And God, knowing the intentions of every heart, guides the wise men after they have come to the side of the baby and offered their gifts and worshiped, guides them to go another way, not to go back to Herod and tell Herod what had happened. Their GPS was recalculating divine intervention. So what is this story about? Probably many things. But the thing that I want to pull into your attention today is that this story is really about weird Gentile foreigners being welcomed to the manger, being invited to the manger by God, being guided to the manger by God. That's kind of outrageous. Why wasn't it somebody else? Why wasn't it the good church-going folk? No, it was these weird guys that normally wouldn't be allowed in polite company. It was them. This baby was turning the world upside down from the moment of his birth. And then he grew up and he began to confirm that he was going to turn the world upside down. Who did he hang out with? He didn't hang out with the muckety-mucks, didn't hang out with the priests and the scribes after he got to a certain age. He hung out with prostitutes and tax collectors and sinners and lepers and all the lowest of the low. He touched lepers, which was unheard of. It would have rendered you ritually unclean, and brought healing to them. When a woman with an issue of blood came up behind him and touched his garment and was healed, he felt that happen, and he turned, and instead of chiding her, instead of shaking his finger at her and saying, you should not be here, because she shouldn't have been there, he said, daughter, your faith has made you well. He affirmed her for her courage. And there was at least one encounter that was so radical. It's one of my favorite scriptures in the 4th chapter of John. He had a conversation with a Samaritan woman. This woman was he shouldn't have had this conversation, should not have given this woman the time of day. She was a half-breed Samaritan. She was from the north, which meant that she didn't worship properly. And she was not only that, but she was a woman of low moral character, apparently, having been married 5 times and now living with someone who was not her husband. Nobody else would go near her. And Jesus invited her into a conversation, and they talked. They talked longer than he talked with anybody else, at least as far as it got recorded in the scriptures. This is the longest conversation that is recorded between this woman and Jesus. And in that conversation, they talked about things like worshiping in spirit and in truth. And at the end of that conversation, she went back to her village and became his first evangelist as she brought many people from that village back to meet Jesus. Apparently, not only are prostitutes and tax collectors and sinners welcomed at the manger, apparently not only are lepers and bleeding women welcomed at the manger, but Samaritan women of low repute are welcomed at the manger. And some of them get conscripted into ministry and sent off to be evangelists. And all of these things, I think, show the depth and breadth and width of God's love that was made so real in Jesus. And yet, in spite of this story, the early church really struggled to include Gentiles in the church. I don't know why. Maybe they forgot this story. Maybe they didn't want to take this story seriously. Maybe it was too threatening. Eventually, they struggled and struggled. Do you have to first become a Jew, if you're a Gentile, before you can become a Christian? And that was kind of the standard procedure for a while. And they finally worked through it, and they made the right choice. I think for people like you and me, most of us have no Jewish heritage, they welcomed us into the church. And we learned from that there was no need to follow the law first, no need to be circumcised. None of that was necessary. Gentiles really were welcome at the manger. It took them a while to catch on. It took the world a while to catch on. And as I think about, our understanding of the depth and width and breadth of God's amazing love, which is so clearly illustrated in these stories, we're still working on understanding it, aren't we? 2,000 years later. Because it wasn't so long ago that we thought slavery was okay. And we really thought it was ordained by God. The church, is who I'm speaking of, not me personally, but the church. They thought that slavery was okay, that it was ordained by God, justifiable by the Bible. And then they got over that and they moved into an era in where people with different colored skins were separated by the color of their skin, and there were separate bathrooms and separate lunch counters, and some people had to go to the back of the bus. And the church apparently thought that was okay for a long time. I don't think the church would have said that people with darker skin were not welcome at the manger, but I think we did imply, the whole church implied, that they could be at the manger, but in the back row in the nosebleed seats. Do you know what I'm saying? That there were first-class and second-class citizens. And we've moved further down that road, but we're not there. And then there's this whole matter of could God call women into ministry? And does the sweep of God's love include such radical things as that? And then could God call a woman into a senior pastorate? And I know that's a whole different thing, and for some of you that's still an ouchy point. I'm sorry. Here I am. God called me here. I was called for 20 years before I ever responded. I have to tell you that. And the reason I didn't respond was because I didn't think it was okay. I'd never seen a woman pastor, didn't have a model, and I thought it was forbidden. Now, here's the truth about that. I understood more and more clearly all the time that it was God that was calling me, and I knew it was God that was calling me, but I was deferring to the rules of men. And I wasted 20 years, Here we are now in 2019, still struggling to understand the breadth of God's love, the depth of God's love, the wondrous intention God has to include everyone in this worship of Jesus at the manger. And we are in particular coming up in 2019 on a special general conference of the United Methodist Church that will meet beginning on February the 23rd. And their charter is to figure out how the United Methodist Church is going to deal with issues concerning the inclusions of LGBTQIA persons. The questions that they will look at are multi-layered and complex. And there's some language in the discipline that they're going to be looking at and seeing if they can figure out how to change it, if they're going to change it. Now, there's some stuff in the discipline that we all agree about, absolutely, and I'm so proud of that. Our current discipline, our Book of Law, meticulously makes clear that all persons are individuals of sacred worth, created in the image of God, and that all need the ministry of the church. And it is clear that we are to live together in Christian community, welcoming, forgiving, and loving one another. And the discipline urges us not to reject lesbian and gay members and friends. But it also clearly forbids persons who are self-identified practicing homosexuals from being ordained or from serving in ministry. And it forbids United Methodist clergy like Lee and I from officiating at same-sex weddings. And it forbids our churches from being the sites of such marriages. Now, here's the thing about this, and if you looked at a discipline in 1960, none of that language was there. That was all added in 1972, and since that time, those few sentences have seemingly become the focus of the entire church. They've been hotly debated every time the church gathers. Sometimes it seems to me that we've made this one issue more important than anything. Jesus never talked about it. He never addressed it. He talked about a lot of things, many of which we don't want to talk about. We'd rather talk about this one. He talked a lot about money. We don't like to talk about money. He talked a lot about hard hearts. We don't want to talk about hard hearts either. He talked a lot about following rules instead of following the heart, and we don't much want to talk about that either. So this gathering is going to consider at its basic point, can we remain a United Methodist Church? Can we come to a place where we agree on enough to stay together? And what does that look like? I put it before you as a matter of deep prayer, because you're going to start hearing about this in the news. People are watching us. They will be watching us, and they're already watching us. And I want you to be prepared to know what is happening. And my observation is that different camps of the church are preparing almost as if for war. I find it heartbreaking. You probably have strong ideas about this issue, and I just hope they were shaped by deep and careful study of the Bible, by prayerful consideration about Jesus' words and Jesus' actions, and by paying close attention to God's loving and grace-filled initiative to the whole world, even the Magi. Your personal experience may influence your perspective. I know many people in this room have sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, beloved, who struggle to find a place in the world, a world that thinks there's something wrong with them. My perspective is shaped by my seminary experience. I got there for some of my intensive classes, and there was a core of 8 to 10 women who clearly were called by God. The call of God was so on these women. And yet, you could recognize that, and they were following that call, and yet they also said, I'm a lesbian. That's who God made me to be. And for me, that was so compelling. God is calling women who have that understanding of their identity. And I really prayed. I said, God, what are you doing here? And that's always on my mind when I think about this issue. I'm not trying to persuade you to a particular view today, but I am inviting you, all of you, wherever you stand on this issue, whether you're on the progressive end, hanging off the left edge of the world theologically and on this issue, or if you're on the right and hanging off the right edge of the world and this is making your hair curl to even think about this issue, I'm inviting all of you to consider this possibility. First of all, the truth that that person way over there that feels like the enemy, that person is welcome at the manger. That's the first truth. And the second is to consider the possibility that God may be at work in that person over there, inviting you into a new understanding of God's vision for the world. We need to remember the truth of this story. God often works in surprising, shocking ways, shocking, unimaginable ways, to fling open the doors of grace and welcome the stranger to the manger. So as I complete this, I just say, who is the stranger for you? By the way, you have in your bulletin a description of the plans that will be brought to that general conference. These, at a minimum, will be presented. Others will be presented, and these may be completely changed. But this is for your information, so that as questions come to you, you have some sense of what is going on in the greater church. May God guide us as we move through this time. As we prepare for the offering today, we always try to hold up something that's going on in the church and give you thanks for the dollars that you've already given. And today, it just seems right to call the attention to the work of the trustees. Your ordinary gifts take care of ordinary matters, like the installation of rails. Isn't that awesome? I pointed them out once before, but we hadn't had these rails before, and now we do. Our trustees work all the time to do maximum work with minimum dollars to keep this place comfortable and safe and a place where people want to come. And your dollars support that daily work of our trustees. We are so grateful. The ushers will come to receive our offerings.